Richard, nous sommes réunis ici au domaine de la Salse. Nous nous sommes rencontrés en 2021. Tu as d'abord rencontré Sylvain qui t'a invité à montrer ton film L'autre monde au domaine de la Salse dans notre saison estivale de nos conférences. Et puis, nous nous sommes rencontrés, Marc et moi-même, ensemble le 3 avril 2021. Et le courant est passé tout de suite entre nous. Et voilà, nous sommes de nouveau réunis ici dans la maison de Gendrini, au domaine de la Salse. Et je voulais savoir tes impressions. Qu'est-ce que ça t'a fait la première fois quand tu es arrivé ici à la Salse?
Well, for me, it was a grand pleasure, plus grand pleasure, a great pleasure to come at last back to the cells, because it is the completion of a journey that began in the summer of 1990, a long time ago, when I first came here to this house, to the Domaine de la Salles, in now 32 years ago, at this time when Jean de Rigny was still with us. At this time I was researching a documentation for Channel 4 television, and I became aware of the story of how Jean de Rigny here in this room, ici, made these analog tape recordings of what might be extraterrestrial or ultra-dimensional beings that apparently coexist with us and live inside the mountain beneath the house where we are currently seated. Exactly. I heard the story first in 1990, and it haunted me because it is very similar to a story by H.P. Lovecraft, the story of the Whisperer in Darkness, the story of the farmer in the remote farmhouse who makes the analog recordings of these mysterious nocturnal encounters. So I heard the tale of Jean de Rigny and came all the way up the Valley of the Cells and came at last to the domain, where I had the honor and the privilege of meeting briefly Jean himself. I'm super grateful for this opportunity. And the entire experience became part of the inspiration for Color Out of Space, the film that we made 2 years ago. The story of the character played by Tommy Chong in the movie is very closely based on what happened here in this house. So it felt like the closing of a circle when Sylvain came forward and invited me to the cells. Particularly strange for me was that this came shortly after the 7/7/7 attack. This was in April.
Yeah, it was the day just after.
It was literally, the day after this attack is brought against me, at which point the guardians of the cells stepped forward and placed me under your protection and brought me here to the domain. And at this time I was so traumatized, I don't think I had any real feelings at all. I was completely confused and thrown into I guess some form of post-traumatic stress disorder. And I recall we celebrated Beltane here at the end of April, and made a big bonfire outside the house. And this moment will always stay with me. The way that the glowing mist flowed in from the Ren Plateau, and the way that the smoke of our fire was sucked up into it, and the entire strange occult ambience of that moment.
Tu es né le 22 novembre 1966 à Fish-Hoek en Afrique du Sud et tu as étudié l'anthropologie à l'université de Cape Town. Durant tes années de lycée que c'est durant ces années de lycée que tu intègres le Young Filmmakers Workshop, et c'est à ce moment-là que tu as fait ton premier film Rite of Passage, tourné sur Super 8. Le court-métrage de 10 minutes esquisse la comparaison entre l'homme moderne et l'homme primitif. Cette œuvre t'a permis de remporter l'IAC International Student Film Trophy en 1984. Dans ce premier film, donc, tu présentes tes deux passions, l'anthropologie et le cinéma. Penses-tu que ces deux passions te viennent directement de ton père et de ta mère et qu'il y avait comme une sorte de prédestination à cela?
Yeah, almost certainly. I mean, from the point of view that my father was a failed filmmaker who had ambitions to make movies, but lacked the talent or the technical skill to make it happen. He'd worked on the set of the Alexander Korda production of The Thief of Baghdad before leaving England, and was always haunted by these memories. And when I was growing up, there was editing equipment and camera equipment lying around that I was able to play with as a child. And I was introduced to 16mm film very young. I got to watch a print of King Kong on 16mm when I was 4 years old, which heavily influenced me. And I became immediately very interested in stop motion animation, in creating models of dinosaurs and tabletop worlds as a child. So this, I guess, grew up to the point where I started working with human beings rather than plasticine claymation models. Rites of Passage really was a first attempt to make a movie with primitive people, with Stone Age men. It's the narrative is set in an unspecific Neolithic period. We were only able to shoot it I was still at college at the time, so I had to cut a class in college once a week, and me and my friend Greg Copeland would climb up the mountain and maybe do 1 or 2 shots of this movie a week. At this time, there was no formal film education in South Africa. There was just this young filmmakers workshop, which was basically a once-a-week filmmaking class, very unevolved. And myself and my friend Greg borrowed the camera equipment from the film class, and slowly over a period of about 6 months shot Rites of Passage. We couldn't persuade actors to come, so I played the lead caveman myself and had to, after college, strip myself naked and cover myself with mud, shoot the strange movie shot by shot. We were extremely proud of it, and thought we'd achieved something really unusual. And finally, after 6 months, we showed it to the tutor at the filmmakers workshop, who was a man named John Hill. And John completely freaked out when he saw it, and immediately expelled both of us from the film class and confiscated the movie. And later sent a lengthy letter to my mother explaining all the reasons why he felt compelled to expel us and destroy the movie, which I think was a sign of what the rest of my career was going to be like. Neither of us expected it. We both thought that the adults would be pleased or potentially impressed by what we had shot. We were not expecting the violent reaction to immediately expel us and suppress the film. It took me maybe 1 year to steal back most of the movie. I had to ingratiate myself to John at the filmmakers workshop and gradually get the keys to the safe where the rushes were kept. And then after about a year, I managed to steal back enough of the movie that we were able to cut it together. And then we entered it into international competitions. And in London, it won something called the IAC International Student Film Trophy, at which point it was competing with material from UCLA and the University of Southern California and the National Film School in Beaconsfield. So a very high quality of work, and the fact that we were able to compete in this arena eventually led to funding being granted in South Africa to create the first film school in South Africa. Crazily enough, at the time that Rites of Passage won the award in England, I was already on the run from the military police in South Africa because I'd been drafted into the South African Army, which I subsequently deserted. While on the run, the movie won the Student Film Trophy in London. John, the film tutor, flew to London, accepted the award on our behalf, took the movie back, There was only one copy of it because Super 8 is the negative. The positive is the negative of Super 8. So John took back the film again, then took the film back to South Africa and used rites of passage to get funding from the University of Cape Town and other sources to establish what became the Cape Town Film and Video School. So it's a strange foundation story. I then took about 5 years to eventually steal the movie back again. It was a
what a story
process.
for a first movie.
Yeah, it was a full-on nightmare. Yeah.
And indeed, the subject was a bit influenced by your mother's studying and your passion for anthropology, also.
Well, I should have mentioned that. My mother, of course, is a self-trained anthropologist and folklorist. So the bringing together of filmmaking and anthropology felt, I guess, completely natural and was probably something I was just indoctrinated into by my parents.
Thank you, Richard. Dans les années 80, sur la lancée de tes premiers succès, tu réalises l'ambitieux film Incidents in an Expanding Universe in 1985, en 1985, d'une durée de 45 minutes et tourné sur pellicule 8 mm, prenant place dans une contre-utopie. Le film servira de travail préparatoire pour le film Hardware. En 2037, le soldat robuste Max et la sculptrice fatiguée Nikki tentent de maintenir une relation dans un avenir totalitaire, sombre, en proie à la guerre, aux retombées nucléaires et à la surpopulation. Des flashbacks montrent la romance vouée à l'échec de Mac et de Nikki au fil des ans, alors que les choses empirent et que le monde se détériore autour d'eux. Qu'est-ce qui t'a donné l'idée et l'envie d'aborder pour la première fois la science-fiction? Ne trouves-tu pas que tu étais vraiment précurseur pour le coup? Car les films dystopiques n'existaient quasiment pas à l'époque, alors qu'aujourd'hui, ces thèmes sont omniprésents au cinéma et dans les séries. En y repensant aujourd'hui, n'y vois-tu pas des sortes d'anticipation du futur de ta part, ou juste en fait des coïncidences étranges de la vie?
No, I think it was very much part of the plan in some funny way, because Rites of Passage, the first movie, concerns itself with the dawn of mankind, Neolithic human beings. So after Rites of Passage, our feeling was that as we were dealing with the distant past, the next film we should deal with the future. Mm-hmm. It made sense that the second film should be science fiction and a look into the immediate future. And I guess the dystopian setting comes because I was simply thinking about what seemed to me the most probable future. I've always been a pessimist, I guess, about technology. And at that time, I was a young teenager. I think I was still only 15 years old, 14 or 15. Like a lot of young adolescents, I was very depressed. I'd had a very negative view about my own future, the future of humanity in general. And this was not hard in white South Africa, where all of us were told from the very beginning that we were doomed, that we didn't belong in Africa, that the country was going to implode, that there was no future. So this basic sort of punk notion of no future, no future, no future was kind of drummed into us as teenagers. I recall the white South African population per capita to the white population had the highest suicide rate in the world at that point in time. It also had the highest rate of one-day pattern killings and family slayings, all of which I think reflect the negativity and pessimism of the apartheid era. So that rubbed off onto my view of the future. I imagined a totalitarian, authoritarian future not dissimilar to the world that we were living in South Africa at that point in time. A lot of the kids acting in Incidents in an Expanding Universe were themselves maybe 6 months or 1 year away from being drafted into the Angolan Bush War. Mm-hmm. Almost all of us had bloodshed, war and death thrown into our lives immediately after shooting the Super 8 movie. So the sensation of impending doom and of war hanging over the characters, the characters getting their call-up papers and being sent to the zone, etc., are all in some ways a reflection of what we're living through. Now, I was a smart kid, so I was reading science fiction at that point in time, and dystopian science fiction has always been with us, from George Orwell's 1984 through to particularly influential on me at that point in time was a book called Make Room by Harry Harrison, which was the book that the film Soylent Green, Soleil Vert en français, is adapted from. I'd seen Soylent Green in the cinema, and I saw that it was adapted from a novel by Harry Harrison, so I went back and I read the book, which is even more distressing and even more depressing than the movie. Put a lot of ideas into my head, such as it was the first time I heard about the greenhouse effect. The idea, it was the first time I heard about global warming. This concept that not even a nuclear war, just environmental desolation and slow pollution could create a situation which would change the climate of planet Earth and cause vast problems with the water supply, with the food supply, population displacement, etc. These are all concepts which Harry Harrison touches on in Make Room, which is decades ahead of its time. And clearly is what spawned Soylent Green and influenced our Super 8 work.
Toujours dans les années 80, tu travailles sur 2 courts-métrages supplémentaires, In a Season of Soft Rains, qui était un autre voyage futuriste, mais une majorité des rushs furent perdus, et Dust Devil, qui était un des premiers travaux sur pellicule 16 mm, inspiré par une série de meurtres irrésolus en Namibie. Ce court-métrage n'a jamais été terminé, mais les rushs peuvent être vus sur le DVD édité par Subversive Cinema. Peux-tu nous raconter les circonstances ou coups du sort qui ont amené la perte des rushs de ces courts-métrages? Est-ce que ça a été compliqué pour toi de passer au 16 mm?
Well, Dust Devil was the first real movie that we attempted to shoot after Incidents in an Expanding Universe. And it was it marked the jump up to 16 mm and shooting on negative. We'd reached a limit as to how far you could go on Super 8. We were trying to do optical processing on Super 8 on Incidents in an Expanding Universe, and we were really just pushing too far for the medium. We had to go to 16 mm, which was a lot more expensive. Dust Devil was really conceived as the cheapest and simplest movie we could make. I thought, can we tell a story which is just with 2 characters and a car? We had a red Volkswagen, and it should be a girl driving in the desert, picks up the devil who is hitchhiking. And this seemed like the simplest idea we could have, that we could use the African landscape and maybe 2 actors and a vehicle to shoot the 16 mm movie. But of course, Dust Devil's a devil movie. So you should never challenge the devil. It was cursed from the moment we started. Every kind of nightmarish thing happened on Dust Devil. The first 16 mm shoot was a complete nightmare. We nearly lost our lives on numerous occasions. Just all kinds of crazy things happened. We were in a very bad car accident early in the process, and later we were attacked by a rogue element of the police force. While we were shooting in Namibia, the South African police who were stationed in Namibia at the time all received notice that they were being recalled back to South Africa, that Namibia was being given over to the United Nations, to the peacekeeping troops to administer. And the uniformed South African police had a choice between either taking early retirement or being transferred back into South Africa. The way that they responded was to get very, very drunk, realizing that they were going to lose their jobs. They then went out and just effectively wanted to kill anyone that was around. They stormed into the place where we were staying at about 3 in the morning and wanted to shoot us. The cameraman escaped by diving through a window. I hid under a table in the kitchen. And the first Dust Devil shoot was truly nightmarish. and we incorporated a lot of that material back into the 35mm movie that was eventually made. The car accident involving the cattle truck and the psychotic uniformed cops in Dust Devil are all based on things that happened during the 16mm shoot, which was a full-on nightmare. So we were unable to complete the 16mm film. I was forced to flee the country as well, and thought, okay, I'll try and raise money in England or find a way to come back and complete the shooting, which I eventually did with the 35mm version of Dust Devil. We did eventually complete this film. But Season of Soft Rains was the film I tried to shoot in London on Super 8, and we shot a lot of it. It was going to be pretty much a feature-length Super 8 movie. Much of it home processed in the squat where we were staying, and I was very, very happy with the way that Season of Soft Rains was turning out. But unfortunately, the entire movie was pretty much destroyed by my first girlfriend, accidentally. It came that I went to Afghanistan, and during the time I was in Afghanistan, my first girlfriend assumed that I was dead. By the time I got back, she'd gotten rid of most of my personal effects. And that included all the film cans. She got tired of the pile of movie cans that were tying up the corner of the room, and just put them in a skip or got rid of them somewhere. And at this point, unfortunately, in a Season of Soft Rains, ceased to exist.
Pour éviter la mobilisation dans la guerre contre l'Angola, tu émigres à Londres en 1986 et tu commences à réaliser des clips musicaux comme celui pour Public Image Limited, groupe de punk en 1987, Fields of the Nephilim, groupe de rock gothique, ou Renegade Soundwave, groupe de musique électronique. Comment s'est déroulée ton intégration dans le pays de tes origines familiales? T'es-tu plongé dans l'univers musical? Pourquoi t'es-tu plongé dans l'univers musical? Et que retiens-tu de cette période, de cette expérience?
Well, I fled South Africa, and I tried very hard to be English. I tried to embrace the new country that I was in. It took me a while to realize that I could never actually be English, that I was always going to be a foreigner, and that the Brits would never quite treat me as one of their own. But I did try, and I tried to get work by giving copies of incidents in an expanding universe to anyone who would watch them, and sending them to TV stations and to different production companies, trying to find a way to get another science fiction movie made. This was really the germ of hardware which grew out of it. And we kept bothering these people and sending them different letters begging that to get a meeting. And eventually one of the production companies that we were attempting to get funds from put us in touch with a goth band that were looking for someone to shoot a music video. And we thought, okay, we'll try and do this. And by good luck, this turned out to be Fields of the Nephilim, who were looking to shoot their first music video. And we shot this on Super 8. It was just two of us in the crew of a Super 8 camera. And I think we shot it in one day in a barn in Stevenage. It was made for £500, I recall, was the budget. And this proved to be essentially a positive experience. And translated to more low-budget work. And this then led to the Public Image Limited video. Basically, I think I had a pretty punk attitude from the very beginning, and my whole sense of there not being any future or any point to it, I think, fitted very well with Public Image Limited and what John Lydon was about. And I was picked out of the bag because I submitted a treatment for the Public Image Limited song where I suggested we should stage an all-singing, all-dancing abortion. Lydon should be the chief abortionist, and the rest of the band could be the surgical team, and we could shoot it like a government information film. And the proposal was so horrible that Lydon picked me out of the bag, and we shot what turned out to be my first real professional music video. It was the first time I had a union crew. It was the first time that we shot on anything bigger really than a Super 8 or a 60mm camera. Suddenly I had a crane, a dolly. There was suddenly maybe 100 people working on the shoot. Makeup van, yeah, honey wagons, electricians, the entire thing. So it was super intimidating. It was a big jump from amateur filmmaking to the real thing. But we took to it, and we ended up shooting maybe one music video every couple of months for about 3 or 4 years, because it was the only way we could make money. I was very poor at that point in time, and as a South African immigrant trying to get asylum in the UK, I couldn't sign on to unemployment benefit. And in most cases, I couldn't get legal work. So there were times when we were extremely poor and living on whatever we could scratch together. I was working for cash-in-hand jobs, washing dishes and delivering newspapers and doing crazy things during this period. But yeah, the work was yeah, super stimulating and put us in touch with a lot of fantastic artists, a lot of people who would never have met otherwise. It was a way that I ended up meeting people like Lemmy or Iggy Pop, and of course John Lydon, folk and Carl McCoy from Fields of the Nephilim, people who would be instrumental when it came to realizing hardware.
En 1989, simplement armé d'une caméra 16 mm, tu décides de réaliser un documentaire sur la sainte guerre que les Moudjahidines mènent contre les Russes. Cette période est très intense car tu as failli laisser ta peau et tu as été obligé de fuir le pays après la bataille de Jalalabad en mars 1989. Si tu le veux bien, nous ferons peut-être une interview exclusive sur ce sujet qui est très long et nécessite beaucoup d'éclaircissements. Mais peux-tu nous dire déjà comment t'es venue cette idée folle à l'époque de quitter l'Angleterre et d'aller là-bas? Et quelles ont été les conséquences psychologiques directement après ton retour de ce pays?
Well, for many years I'd been interested in Afghanistan, and this was largely because of reading the work of Robert E. Howard as a child. I loved Conan the Barbarian. And Robert E. Howard also wrote about Afghanistan and the Hindu Kush. So I read these stories like Swords of Scheherazade and The Lost Valley of Iskander, and already had a fascination to see the Karakorums in the Hindu Kush. And I'd heard the stories about Shambhala and about this mythical Sufi initiatory center somewhere within the Hindu Kush, and these stories of Gurdjieff. So I had a fascination with this area already, and it was always forbidden because of war. The various geopolitical problems prevent us Westerners from penetrating into the heart of the Hindu Kush or the Karakorums. But the thought had been in my head for a long time. And after 2-3 years of working on the music videos in London, I got tired of having to shoot a music video every couple of months to pay the rent. And the work we were doing was deteriorating. We were shooting anything just to pay the rent. And I recall we were making a particularly lousy dance video pitched for kind of preschoolers. It was very young children dancing with animated worms. After the shoot, I was thinking, I have no career. This is what am I doing here? My policy as a director has always been first on, last off. I like to arrive before the crew, before anyone else is there, and make the initial decisions, and I like to stay until everything has been taken out of the location, until all the cable is washed and all the lenses are secured and back in their boxes. I like to be through the whole process. I don't go home early. So I went from the shoot with the last van to leave from the location. and this was being driven by a guy who was doing odd jobs to try and get money. His name was Carlos Mavrolian, and Carlos was complaining about the gears on the truck as we were driving out, and he said this is like as difficult as driving a BTR 60. And I thought, shit, that's a lightweight Soviet aluminium troop transporter used in the invasion of Afghanistan. How come this guy is able to drive one? So I asked him, what the hell were you doing driving a BTR 60? And he told me that he was a veteran of the jihad of the war in Afghanistan and was now marooned in London and was trying to save enough money to go back to Afghanistan to continue to fight in the jihad. So I said, I tell you what, if I pay for your ticket to go back to Afghanistan, will you take me with you? And I was desperate to get out of doing the music videos. Thought, okay, here was an opportunity to enter the country, to gain access to one of the guerrilla parties that would be able to get us across the closed border and into the heartland of the country. So I took this opportunity, which was really just to pay for Carlos to go back to the war and to go with him. And this then led into obviously the journey that we ended up making, which led to us getting sucked into the war in various complicated ways, and we ended up in the siege of Jalalabad and sustained heavy injuries. I was lucky not to be wounded or killed myself. And after a number of ridiculously far-fetched and crazy situations, I ended up making it back to London. And the consequences of it was I was probably suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder by the time I arrived back in London. To be honest, I credit my escape from Afghanistan to psychedelic drugs. I took a huge amount of LSD with me into the country in the medical kit that we had. I took a whole page of blotter acid. And I think the thought was that if we eventually found our way to Shambhala or found our way to Bamiyan, it would be a great place to trip on the head of Buddha in Bamiyan Valley, for instance, or up in the Karakoram. So I'd packed this LSD in the medical kit. And at the point when everyone else that I knew or had any connection with was either dead or wounded, and I was the last one left standing during the Battle of Jalalabad, I became convinced I would be killed next because everyone else was already dead. And I was putting a field dressing on the legs of my cameraman, and I found the blotter acid in the medical kit. And I thought, okay, I'm going to die anyway. This doesn't matter anymore. And I started eating large amounts of the LSD at that point. And I think it was the sheer fact that I was tripping off my face for the latter phases of the battle and the war that enabled me to survive, make it out of there. It speeded me up and improved my perception, and gave me a slight edge, which I think enabled me to make it out alive. But the side effect was that I was really functionally insane by the time I got back to London. My psyche was not in a good shape. And under normal circumstances, I should probably have been given psychiatric help. Mm-hmm. But instead, the circumstances I landed in were already so extreme that I ended up making hardware instead. While I was away, one of the hardware scripts that I'd mailed out to every production company I could reach in London had fallen into the hands of Harvey Weinstein from Miramax, and Weinstein had decided to put money into hardware. First I found out about it, I was still trying to get out of the country. In fact, I was a refugee hospital in Peshawar where I was trying to get the surgeons to operate on the cameraman when the first call came through somehow through the network that people in London were searching for me. And this was because of hardware falling into the hands of the Weinsteins. So rather than getting psychiatric help, I found on return that I had to direct hardware for Harvey.
C'était peut-être une bonne manière d'ailleurs de probably a good psychiatric therapy
Well,
to make this movie.
well, hardware was my PSD, what I had in place of therapy.
En 1990, à l'âge de 24 ans, tu réalises ton premier long métrage Hardware, on était en train d'en parler. Ce film de science-fiction post-apocalyptique avec en guest star Lemmy de Motorhead et la voix de d'Iggy Pop rapporte à sa sortie 10 millions de dollars, tourné avec un budget d'approximativement 960 000 livres. Il fut financé par les frères Weinstein et distribué aux États-Unis par la Millimeter Film Division. Ce film a été nominé 4 fois et a reçu 3 prix, le UAC Gold Seal Award, le Brussels International Festival of Fantasy Film et Fantasporto. Ce succès t'a définitivement fait connaître auprès du grand public. Est-ce que cette réussite a été facile à gérer à l'époque? Est-ce que tu as ressenti une énergie plus forte encore pour réaliser des projets plus ambitieux suite à ce succès? Ou est-ce que ta vie créative n'a pas du tout été impactée? Et d'après toi, pourquoi ce film est-il devenu un film culte? Est-ce encore un film précurseur avant Matrix et consorts?
I guess Hardware is a quintessentially cyberpunk movie, and that it was really coming out of the punk scene that existed at that point in time in London. It was kind of the end of punk and the beginning of the industrial scene, but it all conspired to coalesce into Hardware, which was a fusing together of a lot of different influences that had been going on already. The Super 8 movie from South Africa, the punk scene, the music videos, 2000 AD comic. Many things came together in 1989 to create this weird little storm of a movie that was shot entirely in the Roundhouse in North London. And I think at the time I was very cynical. I was kind of crazy, but because the movie was so small, it was really £800,000, under £1 million. The very primitive computer animation was done on a school computer. The average age on set was around 16 or 17. The oldest person on set was the first assistant director who had been put on the movie, Ray Corbett, who was the oldest guy there as a kind of school teacher to make certain that the kids didn't run amok. So our expectations were really that the film would go direct to video. I thought that, like any number of alien rip-offs that were floating around at the time with people hunting monsters in dark warehouses, that this film would end up, would have a life on videotape. Instead, it ended up having a 700 print release in the United States and opened wide, which was a big surprise to all of us. It had a much bigger reception than we'd been anticipating. Also, the movie was given an X rating in the United States, which brought me into conflict with censorship again. And we hit the television talk show network in the United States and lobbied hard for the abolition of the X rating and the introduction of the R rating, which eventually became a thing. This was actually a deliberate policy on behalf of Palace and Miramax. Palace Films, the parent company of Hardware, owed most of its success to the success of The Evil Dead, the Sam Raimi movie. Evil Dead only did well at the box office because it was banned in England for a while, and then it was unbanned, and it was a huge success on videotape. So they thought, okay, we'll use this X-rated thing to try and make this film into a bigger success than it would have been otherwise. And, so the whole push for the R rating and the attack on censorship that went with Hardware was part of its marketing push and part of the thing that made the movie into a crazy global success. I had no real ability to enjoy this process, though, because, as usual, my life was infernal. Just terrible, awful things were going on the entire time. Really, what happened was, post-Hardware, I wanted to make another Hardware. I wanted to make a sequel. the Hardware sequel script is much better than the script of the first movie, mostly because Hardware 1 is so tiny. It had so little money. We could only shoot it pretty much in one room. So I really wanted to open it out and show more of the future world and more of what was coming. But while I had been shooting the movie, one of the producers of the film had literally stolen the 16mm footage we'd shot in Afghanistan. We'd shot a lot of 16mm footage in Afghanistan, which we hadn't had the money to digitize. And while I was shooting Hardware, all of our rushes were stolen from the facility house where we'd stored them. And given that people had risked their lives and died for the material, I was honor bound to try and get my rushes back. And the person who will remain unnamed, who had stolen the rushes, only returned the Afghan rushes in return for me signing over the rights to Dust Devil, the uncompleted 16mm movie I'd shot back in South Africa. And I thought, okay, so Dust Devil's just a silly movie with 3 people in a car in the desert, but the Afghan footage is possibly valuable. So I did the deal. As a result, Dust Devil suddenly got made. I wasn't intending that. I was hoping to do to move on to a Hardware sequel, but instead got sent back to South Africa to complete Dust Devil at that point.
Crazy.
Yeah.
En 1996, tu tournes le film L'île du Docteur Moreau, dont tu as écrit le screenplay pour le remake et dont le budget était de 35 millions de dollars. Mais après quelques premiers jours tumultueux, tu as été licencié de ton poste de réalisateur. En effet, les acteurs Val Kilmer et Marlon Brando étaient alors au sommet de leur célébrité. Et leurs égos se sont révélés difficilement contrôlables, notamment car leur situation personnelle était alors difficile. Alors que Marlon Brando avait à l'esprit le suicide de sa fille Cheyenne, son divorce et un test nucléaire français à proximité d'une de ses résidences principales, le script fut retravaillé par une toute nouvelle équipe et le résultat final avait peu en commun avec ton travail original. Afin de pouvoir voir la progression du film, tu t'es fait embaucher comme figurant, portant un masque de lion que tu ne retirais pas durant l'ensemble du tournage afin qu'on ne te reconnaisse pas. Cette période a dû être éprouvante. Peux-tu nous expliquer selon toi quelles sont les forces magiques et subtiles qui ont été à l'œuvre et qui ont rendu impossible l'aboutissement de ton projet?
Well, right at the beginning, I'd like to make one thing perfectly clear about the events on the island of Dr. Moreau. It wasn't a lion mask, it was a dog mask.
Sorry.
Wait, it was a chien.
Ouais.
A dog.
C'était un chien.
Wait, I came back as a dog on the island of Dr. Moreau. But yeah, at the time, for a very long time, I thought that Dust Devil was the worst thing that could ever possibly happen to a human being. The Dust Devil shoot was a living nightmare. Thousands of miles of rough road and something like 48 hire cars totaled, and the number of insane things that happened. I thought that's the worst thing that could ever happen to anyone. But I was wrong. The island of Dr. Moreau was worse. It was a self-created tropical nightmare that couldn't be escaped. Some kind of purgatory or hell that I had somehow constructed for myself. It was a huge out-of-control production. It started because at the end of Dust Devil I was massively in debt, in a lot of trouble. And the only way I could pay the debts on Dust Devil was to sell the island of Dr. Moreau, which was a script I'd been working on for ages. This meant that Dr. Moreau got going. And then Marlon Brando came aboard. The moment Marlon Brando came aboard, I got fired off the production and was initially replaced by Roman Polanski. When I heard that Polanski had come on board, I freaked out, and I called a professional sorcerer warlock friend of mine in London, who had shown an ability to fix things, to joggle the paradigm so that one could positively influence the outcome of events. A friend of mine had a tobacco import company that was in deep financial trouble, and he'd reached out to Skip, the sorcerer, who had done some kind of ritual, and as a result, my friend's company was refinanced by outside investors to the tune of £1 million sterling, which just came out of the blue within 24 hours of Skip's ritual. So we had some confidence in the man. I called him up and said, "Skip, you got to help me. They're taking my movie away." And he did some kind of ritual and fixed things. As a result, Polanski was removed from the project, and Brando inexplicably decided that he would only do the project if I directed it. And I was able to proceed. Obviously, I only made it 4 days into the principal photography, which was not particularly great. One of the main problems we'd encountered was that a huge tropical storm blew up literally on day one. I mean, apart from everything else, we were shooting in the most dangerous waters pretty much in the world. We were on the ocean at a place called Cape Tribulation, which is where Captain Cook ran aground on Endeavour Reef. It's called Cape Tribulation for a reason. The big pyramidal mountain in the background of the whole thing is called Mount Sorrow. And again, it's called Mount Sorrow for a reason, because that place has broken the backs and broken the souls of so many people who have attempted to impose their dreams on far north Queensland and on the Torres Straits. It resists us human outsiders coming in and trying to use it in different ways. And we were shooting on Aboriginal sacred land. I'd reached out to the Kuku Yulanji people and tried to incorporate as many tribal people into the movie as possible, also as a way of channeling funding back into their community, because we were a big multinational production and there were millions of dollars flying around, so it was also an opportunity for the local people to enrich themselves. So it was a strange devil's deal that we made with the tribal people, and it did not go well for us. The location turned against us, and we got pasted by hurricane force winds that literally washed our set away. And after 4 days of literally not being able to get a shot in the can, I was relieved of my duties. And they figured if they got a tougher director in there, they might be able to bring it to heel. In point of fact, they had to wait months until the weather changed and until things settled down to the point that they could shoot. And then even after they brought in John Frankenheimer to take over the movie, production did not speed up on the film. There was something like close to 40 or 44 main unit shooting days on which not a single shot got into the can, even on Frankenheimer's watch. And Dr. Moreau did not want to get made. It resisted production at every point. Certainly the movie that did materialize doesn't, I think, use a single line of dialogue from the original script, and is utterly changed. The only things which survive from my conception of it are the characters and the location. Dr. Moreau's compound was so beautifully built by Graham Grace Walker, the production designer, who did such a tremendous job of building Moreau's world, that it's still there now. Even decades later, Moreau's compound survives deep within the rainforests of far north Queensland. It's still there. So it's an extraordinary thing. I didn't go home. After being relieved of my duties on the movie, I ended up out in the rainforest, and initially just tried to drop out, and because I'd actually not done anything to warrant being fired, it had forced New Line Cinema to pay me my entire salary. I was on a pay or play deal. So I'd been paid out a huge amount of money and was suddenly technically rich. But I was no longer shooting a movie, so I simply ended up out in the rainforest with two dingo pups and a lot of money and a very, very large bag of marijuana, and ended up living with the tribal people out in the rainforest for a few months.
Taking care of the monkeys, no?
I was two dingo pups. It was two dingo puppies that lost their mum. That somehow ended up with the entourage, and ended up living next to a river in the Mary River in the right out in the tablelands for months and months. And I'd gone troppo. I'd gone completely native. And somewhere after about 3 months out there, I remember I saw a light in the rainforest one night, in an area where there weren't any humans, and I thought, well, I wonder if these are primitive people or who is down there. And the next morning I went to the campfire, and I found it was a bunch of extras from the island of Dr. Moreau, who were asleep around the campfire, and they recognized me, and they had with them a dog costume and some bits and pieces, and they explained to me that the movie was shooting again, that John Frankenheimer had taken over as director, that somehow New Line had revived the production, persuaded me to go with them back to where the film was being shot, and I adopted the dog costume. They'd fired every single person off the crew pretty much. I think there was only about 1 or 2 people left on the crew who even knew who I was. So I didn't need to keep the dog mask on all the time, because most people had never seen me before. John Frankenheimer had never met me. When Frankenheimer came on board, he replaced the DP, the director of photography. Dariusz Wolski was the original director of photography. Dariusz was canned and replaced by Billy Fraker. And when Billy Fraker came aboard, Fraker brought his own technical crew. So they were all different people who were shooting it, so none of them knew who the hell I was. So after a few hours, I was able to take off the dog mask and put it back on for the shots. And I integrated myself into the beast person population on the island, and became a character trapped inside the movie.
Ouais, et en plus, ce film a été tellement chaotique, ce tournage est tellement fou, qu'il y a une personne qui a décidé d'en faire un documentaire.
Well, a documentary followed approximately 25 years later. At the time, I was so burned out by the experience, I figured I was done with the film industry, and more or less walked away from it all. And it was really multiple years later that David Gregory put together Lost Soul, which was the first time really that the public or the outside world had any inkling of what had really happened on the island of Dr. Moreau. I've got to say that wonderful as David's movie is, it's still only part of the story. There's an awful lot that happened that Lost Soul doesn't even begin to approach. So it was, at the time I really thought it was probably the most, the craziest thing that could ever happen to a human being. And very difficult for, I think, for anyone to stay sane through a process like that.
À l'aube du nouveau millénaire, tu réinvestis le documentaire avec The Secret Glory, drame, thriller et guerre d'une heure 37 minutes. En 2001, fort du succès de The Real Jurassic Park, un documentaire sur le blockbuster de Steven Spielberg, Channel 4 décide de s'attaquer avec la même approche scientifique à un autre film culte du cinéaste, Les Aventuriers de l'Arche perdue, et te commande de s'occuper de ce qui devait initialement s'intituler The Real Raiders of the Lost Ark. Ton enquête te conduit, comme dans un jeu de piste, à faire la rencontre du lieutenant SS Otto Rahn, né en 1904 et mort en 1939. Historien féru d'occultisme, en quête du Saint Graal en pays cathare, et un peu avant la guerre, le réalisateur de Hardware, toi-même, découvre alors que l'histoire de cet homme aurait bien influencé le scénario du classique de Steven Spielberg. Qu'est-ce qui t'a tant fasciné chez Autoran? Est-ce à cette époque que tu tombes amoureux de la région Occitanie?
Well, in the summer of 1990, the religion department of Channel 4 television in the United Kingdom hired me as a researcher to research a proposed documentary provisionally entitled The Rail Raiders, The Lost Ark. And I got sent to Europe on kind of a dream ticket to try and research the real life backstory to the Indiana Jones movies. I don't know why Channel 4 picked me. It may have been just because of my hat, the chapeau. But I have no qualifications in terms of German Reich history or anything else for the job. But essentially I got sent to find out the truth behind the SS archaeological unit, and whether there was any truth to the stories that of the Nazi mysteries that the SS and the Third Reich were actively seeking the Ark of the Covenant, the Spear of Longinus, or the Holy Grail. And in the course of this inquiry, I began to focus on the Holy Grail story. There's no evidence that the Nazis were ever looking for the Ark of the Covenant. And there is, however, strong evidence to suggest that they were looking for the Holy Grail. So I began to focus on this. In the course of it, I first of all came across the historic personage of Otto Rahn, the German Jewish Grail historian who had been given the brief by the SS to locate the Grail and secure it. And I also came to Montsegur in the French Pyrenees for the first time. And this was the beginning of I guess a lifelong love affair. Like many people, the first time I saw Montsegur, I immediately felt an odd sense of familiarity with the place, as if I had been there before. And the circumstances immediately upon my arrival in the village were so strange that I began to believe Otto's account. I began to think that there was some credibility to what Otto Rahn was saying. All the other Reich historians were saying, well, this is purely evidence that the Nazis were insane. Otto's work was viewed as being an example of the extravagance and insanity of the Third Reich. But the more time I spent in Montsegur and the more closely I looked at Otto's research, the more sense it began to make to me. So I guess I resisted the pressures of the other Reich historians to interpret the story as being a phantasm or a phantasmagoria, something which was just a sign of the madness of the Reich. And I started to feel that maybe Otto was onto something, that there was some truth to what he was saying. And I came across, of course, the story of Catharism for the first time. I started to understand that in the middle of the story was a suppressed spiritual tradition. And I started to learn about the history of Occitania, of the country that once existed here in these mountains, and who had reached a high degree of civilization and science before the 12th century, and of the genocidal campaign that erased the history of what happened here. So the deeper I looked into it, the more involved and obsessed I became, and this drove a wedge between me and my sponsors. Channel 4 Television weren't interested in making a serious documentary about Otto Rahn, the Holy Grail, the Cathars, and the ideological underpinnings of the Holocaust. It was too strong for the sort of early evening slot that they had in mind, so the program never got made. But in the course of the research, this was the time when I met Jean de Rigny, and I met so many people who had such strange accounts to give, including people who had met Otto Rahn and had known him firsthand, that these stories continued to haunt me. And after the island of Dr. Moreau had done, and I'd finally gotten back from the rainforest and had no idea what to do with my life, and I had all this money left over from the production, I decided to pursue the story on my own without the support of the television station. So I independently put together a team, went back to Europe, and started making recordings and interviews of the different witnesses, and started collecting the documents and trying to piece together an accurate account of what really happened here in the years before the war.
En 2002, tu réalises The White Darkness. Ce documentaire est un aperçu des pratiques vaudou en Haïti. Je sais que c'est un de tes films préférés. Pourquoi?
I think of the principal documentaries that I've shot. The White Darkness is the one I'm the proudest of. At least it's the one I think that makes for the fullest meal as a movie. It was really our good luck that we got to shoot this. We were sent to Haiti to shoot a bunch of TV shows for BBC Two. The BBC gave us the press accreditation, the camera equipment, and the whole support crew to cover the voodoo festivals. And while we were there, the US Army reoccupied the island. America decided to take military control of Haiti. So the fact that we were set up and ready with cameras and all of our equipment and our press passes at this point in time enabled us to cover the events in a way that we couldn't possibly have done in Afghanistan. We had multiple camera coverage and pretty decent sound. We had no sound recording available to us at all in Afghanistan. So I think the technical quality, thanks to the participation of BBC Two, led to some pretty good material in White Darkness. I was attempting to go through the voodoo initiations, but the voodoo festivals were somewhat derailed by the political circumstances.
En 2012, tu réalises The Other World, l'autre monde, un documentaire qui parle justement de notre région. Caché profondément dans le sud de la France, pratiquement vierge de tout aspect du monde moderne, se trouve un endroit que plusieurs appellent la zone. Dans ce lieu, qui comprend Montségur, le site du génocide des Cathares et un endroit où les portails vers le passé et les apparitions fantomatiques sont banales, Rennes-le-Château, où un prêtre aurait fait un pacte avec des forces obscures, c'est aussi une énorme forteresse pleine de secrets et de trésors, incluant possiblement l'endroit où est enterré le Saint Graal. Et Bugarache, un lieu qui attire fortement les sectes apocalyptiques et où se trouve une montagne reconnue pour héberger des vaisseaux extraterrestres. Le surnaturel est une réalité de la vie de tous les jours. La magie y est partout. C'est un fait indéniable. Nous avons eu la chance de projeter ce film cet été à notre association à la SAS, ici en ta présence. Ne penses-tu pas qu'au regard de ta quête profonde de spiritualité, il n'y ait pas de hasard à ce que finalement tu finisses ici, dans la zone, comme si tous les chemins ne menaient pas à Rome, mais bien à la zone?
Well, I think it's certainly no mere coincidence. It's part of the crazy lattice of synchronicity that binds all this together. The Other World is kind of a spiritual sequel, or the second part of a spiritual trilogy. It's really following on from The Secret Glory, the Otto Rahn movie. Through Otto, the German Jewish Grail historian, I first discovered this part of the world, this area, which can be very accurately described as the zone a concept that's partly borrowed from the Strugatsky brothers, Boris and Arkady Strugatsky, because the zone really is an area where there is no sense of real consensus reality. It's like a black hole in consensus reality. No one's really sure what's actually happening in there. It's a variety of factors, both historic and geophysical, that have created this area. There's certainly electromagnetic fields at work here. There's a high iron content in the mountains, but it's also to do with the unique histoire, the unique history of the area, which means that it's not quite normal. It's full of strange shades of interpretation, and all of us believe that somewhere hidden deep within it is something which will potentially grant one one's dearest wish. The holy grail, the globe, the room, the thing that will potentially heal one or make one whole again. Many people are drawn here seeking something which will make sense of their lives, the thing which they are somehow missing and which they hope they'll find here somehow within the zone. No one is sure if that's something extraterrestrial, ultra-dimensional, spiritual, or even material. Personally, I'm not searching for a material treasure, as in the treasure of Rennes-le-Château or the Ark of the Covenant, but there's certainly any number of chasseurs de trésors out there with their metal detectors searching even today, which is all of which makes this area super special. I discovered it during the shooting of The Secret Glory, and by following the journals of Otto Rahn and going to the places that he was writing about and observing them firsthand for myself. And through a series of, I guess you could say, initiatory experiences over the course of a decade, it reached a point where I realized I had to remain here. In 2007, I decided I would stay in Montsegur and not return to the outside world. And I made my home here. And since that time, I've now got legal residency in the zone. Occitania has become my adopted homeland. And in the course of that time, I got to deepen my knowledge of the area. The Other World was shot in 2012, which was a significant year because it was the year the Mayan calendar ran out, the year of the epidemic mass hysteria outbreak in Bucharest.
Right.
Where it was the year that martial law was declared in Red the Bad. So this was a crazy time, but Otherworld stands as a document of that period, and so many people like Urani, the little sorcerer of the Russe de Couleur, the River of Colors, who is no longer with us. So many of the people in Otherworld are not here anymore, that I'm super grateful we shot the film when we did, and that it remains as a document of this period.
Oui, un très beau documentaire.
Ouais.
Les gens qui te connaissent qu'à travers tes films te prennent sûrement pour un excentrique et un original. Mais tu es depuis longtemps prédestiné à chercher et à découvrir les grands mystères de la vie. À quel âge a débuté ton intérêt pour les mondes subtils et invisibles?
I imagine that began from the very beginning. My mother was fascinated by sorcery and witchcraft, and was compiling a book on the myths and legends of Southern Africa during my initial years of life. This would have been when I was between the years of 1 and 6 or 7 years old. So much of this time we were visiting Sangoma's traditional healers, African sorcerers. And at an early age, I had not yet hardened my belief system to the point where I didn't believe in magic. It was something which seemed a normal part of the world. It was only when I went to school and met other kids that I realized that magic and the invisible world didn't exist for most people, and it wasn't supposed to have an actual existence. But my belief in that world, I think, was there from the very, very beginning. and possibly also from the first movie I ever saw, this print of King Kong when I was 4 years old. I was immediately struck by the character of Carl Denham, the filmmaker in Kong, who wants to go to a place where no one has been before and bring back the biggest thing that anyone has ever seen, and display it as entertainment on Broadway. So some crazy part of me wanted to go to places where no one had ever been before and bring back sights and stories that no one knew existed before, present them as entertainment.
Tu es un auteur, mais tu es aussi évidemment, ce qui coule de source, un grand lecteur. Et en 2020, tu as adapté une nouvelle de H.P. Lovecraft au cinéma, dans le film Color Out of Space. Comment est né chez toi ce rapport si particulier au monde Lovecraftien? Et dans quelle mesure y vois-tu des correspondances avec l'époque actuelle et la zone mystérieuse ici?
Well, again, H.P. Lovecraft's work was part of my life since I was a child. My mother indoctrinated me into it by reading me Lovecraft's work as bedside stories when I was a child. So I came to it through the Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath, which I think my mother read to me when I was around 6 or 7 years old. So and this was a gateway into the other Lovecraft stories. So by the time I was 12 or 13, I was already a passionate fan of the Cthulhu mythos. I was already playing Call of Cthulhu role-playing games and was heavily versed in the Lovecraft mythology. And Lovecraft's ideas, I think, helped shape my worldview, and it helped enlarge my mind by embracing a bigger universe than I think a lot of people like to think about. And it opened up a lot of different possibilities. And Lovecraft's work's also notoriously difficult to adapt. People have a very hard time translating his material to screen. So the challenge of trying to do Lovecraft justice, to create a movie which would do homage to the work, I think was with me for a long time. And finally, the ideal confluence of events, the opportunity arose a few years ago, which enabled the creation of Color Out of Space. Color Out of Space was written here in the zone. It was written in Montsegur. It was written at a time when, again, I had no money whatsoever, and where I tried to imagine a movie which we could shoot easily in the place where we were. So in my initial conception, I imagined the Gardner farm was here in the south of France. In the early drafts of the script, the Gardners are a British family that in the initial iteration of Color Out of Space, the events took place here in the zone. I tried to write a script which could be shot cheaply and simply in the place we knew. So the Gardner family initially was supposed to be English emigrants who had retired to the south of France, who had bought an old house in France and decided to raise alpacas there. Because I know so many people who come and decide they'll retire to the Pyrenees and they'll do something crazy, like they always think they're going to make a fortune, say, having mohair goats and making mohair sweaters, or there's always some strange scheme that they're going to raise ostriches. So alpacas seemed somehow curiously typical. And here in the south of France, there's a sad habit of these things going wrong. 9 times out of 10, it becomes very difficult for them to keep up the land. Usually the property is more difficult to maintain than they imagine. Usually the business scheme is far-fetched. With many of the couples who move out here, alcoholism becomes an issue quite early on in the first few years. And in many cases, situations disintegrate into marital breakdown, alienation, and murder. Plenty of these kind of tales go floating around the gendarmerie. So the initial take on Colour Out of Space, it was a typical British retired couple with their kids who get into increasing trouble. Then because of the financial issues and the problems of trying to set up Colour Out of Space, it became clear that we couldn't shoot the movie in France. That we couldn't shoot the movie here. There was no interest whatsoever from France in investing in the film, in that for some bizarre reason France doesn't really have a history of sci-fi horror movies. They have a history of fantastic films, but the particular blend of sci-fi horror is kind of alien to the French production aesthetics. So we ended up shooting in Portugal instead. And somewhere along the way it became prudent just to say, okay, it's set in where the story is set, and it moved back to Arkham, New England, but we had to fake New England in Portugal. And the whole thing took a step back closer to the Lovecraft story, perhaps, than the initial drafts.
Dans ce film, en plus, Colour Out of Space, dans cette adaptation de la nouvelle de Lovecraft, il y a un personnage qui, évidemment, pour nous, les salsiens, les gardiens de la salle, a été évident dès qu'on a vu le film. C'est le personnage qui écoute les bruits dans la forêt, qui est une sorte de fusion entre deux personnages réels, qui sont Uranie et Gendrini.
Ouais, this character of Ezra, played by Tommy Chong in Colour Out of Space, fuses elements of Urani, the little sorcerer, with Jean de Rigny and the story of the analog tape recording made here at the spot where we are holding this interview. Right. All the way back in the late 80s, early 90s. The original analog tape recording, sadly, is now lost or stolen. So, yeah, I wish we still had access to the original recordings. But this event is, yeah, recreated in Colour Out of Space with the character of Ezra, who makes the analog Naga recordings of the things moving around underneath his cabin, or at least the vibrational frequency of these otherworldly beings, or of the otherworld itself. Maybe it's the morphogenetic field of another dimension, some kind of mechanical or vibratory sound almost. And this is also the root cause of the mass hysteria outbreak in 2012. It was Jean de Rigny and these initial recordings and the fact that they were played on French national television that put the idea into everyone's heads that there were aliens underneath the Bucharest. Started things turning towards the point where the French military eventually cordoned off the entire mountain and sealed off what they called the controlled zone around Bucharest.
Est-ce que ta quête du Graal, la Dame Blanche, ta passion pour le catharisme, ton intérêt pour les peuples oubliés et la guerre des grands anciens de Lovecraft sont des jalons qui t'ont formé pour accomplir une mission particulière d'incarnation sur Terre? Y vois-tu un sens relié à l'ordre eschatologique?
Well, we're certainly living in deeply eschatological times. I mean, it's hard to escape the sensation that we're going through some very apocalyptic circumstances at present, which maybe it's just my way of seeing things, but events seem to have conspired in such a way that I've ended up being pretty much the PR person for both H.P. Lovecraft's old ones, Les Grands Anciens, as we call them here, and whatever force it is that the Grail represents, whatever that force is in Montsegur, the Dame Blanche, the Déesse, the White Lady, the puissance, the true sovereignty of the land, and that's become my day job. And it seems to me that both things relate to ultra-dimensional forces or deities, certain dethroned pagan deities that are trying to re-manifest into this world. The old ones that want to come back and are trying to reopen the gate to re-manifest into our paradigm, which is a crazy state of affairs. But nonetheless, no matter how I could try and explain it away, that does seem to be the matter of what's going on down here. And we're living now in 2022. We're basically 701 years after the death of the last Cathar adept, Guillaume Belibast, who, before dying at the stake in 1321, allegedly prophesied that after 7 centuries the old ways would return, the laurel would turn green again, that the edifice of the Holy Roman Church would fall, and the old ways would come back. Last year was 777 years after the fall of Montsegur. And again, there's a strong sense that the castle wants its story told, that whatever forces at work in that place is active.
Merci. Où en es-tu actuellement? Comment s'est déroulée ta vie après la sortie du dernier film que tu as fait, Color Out of Space? Qu'espères-tu? Que peut-on te souhaiter pour l'avenir?
Well, right now I'm currently resident in the zone. I haven't left the zone in a couple of years, not since the release of Color Out of Space and the onset of the COVID apocalypse, everything that's followed it. And during this time, a number of forces have conspired to try and kill me, to try and silence me, and to try and erase my work from existence. And the harder that those forces have tried to wipe me out, the more it's convinced me that there must be something somewhere in my work which is worth wiping out. That if I'm worth killing, then there must be something in me that generates that kind of insanity and the incredible lengths to which my adversaries have gone. So at this point in time, I've been fighting to save my life and also to find justice, to basically bring my opponents to trial and reveal what's really happening here. And I do feel fairly optimistic because in some ways it's good for the work. I mean, if this whole run of deeply insane events hadn't taken place, I might have been in danger of becoming bourgeois. But if anything, it's made me more determined to try and get the material out there and to keep going with the projects I'm currently engaged with.
Merci beaucoup, merci pour cette interview, merci, on est vraiment heureux de t'avoir comme ami et merci d'avoir accepté de venir plusieurs fois à la salle pour faire donc cette projection de film qui était du jamais vu dans la région et c'est vraiment un plaisir d'être avec toi et d'être ton ami. Merci Richard.
Ouais, un grand plaisir. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, showing the other world here at the cells was definitely closure of a strange occult circle. Right.